Tonight, we venture into the quiet world of rivers, where stones drift, goddesses descend, and waters meet in hushed confluence. These are not stories of thunder or conquest, but of gentle persistence, the way water shakes the world simply by flowing. This evening brings us 3 river myths that whisper across different cultures. First awaits a tiny traveler, the Pebble's journey, rolling from mountain spring to ocean delta, learning the art of patience along the way. Then calls to us the sacred Ganga's descent, where a river goddess flows down from heaven, her waters blessing the earth with calm. Finally unfolds the confluence of 3 rivers, a Celtic tale where ancient spirits gather and their voices merge into one dreamlike current. For those keeping late hours, tell me, what time is it where you are? Share it below so we can see how these waters reach listeners across the sleeping world. There's something soothing in knowing we drift together under the same stars. And if these myths bring you peace, a quiet like helps other night owls find their way here. Subscribe as well, so our journeys into forgotten waters always return to you. Now it's time to lower the lights, add the soft whisper of a fan or the hush of white noise, and settle into your most comfortable place. Let the currents of tonight's ancient tales carry you toward rest. At first light, the mountain lay bright and open, its ridges lined with pale snow, and its shadowed gullies cut like clean strokes on a page. The sky looked washed and new. Above the highest ledge, a hawk crossed the blue and seemed to slow the day by simply being sure of where it was going. From that calm height, the world was simple: stone, sky, snow, and a thin silver line where meltwater had begun to appear. Old forces moved there without hurry. Gods who prefer quiet work stood near the seam of a granite lip and watched ice loosen. They are the kind who nudge, not shove, who don't split a mountain, but show it how to open. One god bent close and touched a thin crack with one finger. Frost let go. Sunlight reached into the seam and stayed. A new droplet formed, then another, and the weight of water did what time had asked it to do since the first winter. It moved. Inside the mountain, a small stone felt the press change. It had known only darkness and weight, the slow squeeze that makes rock into rock, a long, dreamless sleep. With the drip's steady tap, pressure became invitation. The ledge shifted. The stone slid forward and met the world. It had no name yet. Later, hands would hold it and call it lucky or pretty or smooth. For now, it knew cold, light, and the pull of the new stream. It showed its color to the day, brown with a thin, bright thread through the middle, and lay among moss that held beads of water like tiny lamps. Downslope, a ribbon of the meltwater flashed and threaded itself between the roots. Upslope, the gods watched and said nothing more. They had done enough, placed a path, started a story, set a lesson in motion. From that high place, the valley looked clear. Pines stood in rows. A waterfall had already drawn a white line across a dark cliff. A wooden bridge waited where the ground dipped. The stone lay still and saw all the shapes around it. Sight came first. The stream took the drop the way a hand takes a small weight offered to it. With a short slide, the stone entered the flow and tumbled once. It bumped another stone, rolled, and settled behind a root where the current thinned. The world did not rush. It welcomed the new piece, the way a table welcomes another plate. On the bank, a grandmother and her grandson sat on a flat rock and watched the water move. The boy's bare feet hung and touched the stream in short tests. He laughed when the cold surprised him and pulled back, then tried again. "Listen first," she said. "To what?" "To how it speaks when it's not trying to impress anyone," she said. "Hear the small places, that bend, that ripple, the stones under there." She pointed to the eddy where the stone had come to rest. The boy leaned forward, and the stream's sound separated into parts. The quick chatter over pebbles, the soft hush behind the root, the distant growl of the fall up valley. A jay called, a bee passed, a cart rattled on the road, and a dog barked twice in answer. Sound was here now, layered but not loud. "Does it remember everything?" he asked, eyes on the eddy. "It remembers enough," she said. "It remembers where it's been and where it's going. It remembers how to be patient, even when it looks busy." He watched a small brown stone shift slightly, then hold. "That one knows how to rest." "It will learn," she said. "It has time." He put his palm flat on the warm rock and matched his breath to the stream's steady run. His chest rose, his chest fell. He pressed 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist until he felt his heartbeat, surprised that it was there and had been there all along. Breath, heartbeat, touch. He relaxed because his body had decided the river was safe. The stream widened. On the left bank, a mill wheel turned. The baker's wife leaned from a window, tapped flour from her hands, and watched a dog make a show of chasing a leaf that didn't mind at all. "Getting any work done?" she called across to the miller. "Plenty," he said, and the wheel answered with its slow, wet clap. The boy and his grandmother rose. "We'll come back," she said to the water, as if it were a person they didn't want to offend by leaving too quickly. The boy waved at the eddy and the stone within it, unsure whether he was waving at one thing or all things. Downstream, the stone moved in small ways that mattered. It learned that the current likes to push and then let go, that corners can be softened by choosing not to fight them, that breathing, if a stone could be said to breathe, is like agreeing with the moment you're in. It rolled and found a new pocket, rolled again, found the shade under a fallen limb. A trout hung above it and corrected with the tiniest flex of a fin whenever the flow disagreed with its plans. A dragonfly knitted a path just above the water and then unknitted it, not because it meant to, but because that is what it does. On the bridge, a monk paused. He wore no shoes. He set his bare feet wide and his hands on the rail, palms down, fingers spread. He breathed in for 4, held for 4, out for 4, held for 4. He counted softly to keep the numbers polite. His hands picked up the rails cool, and his chest eased. The stream kept its line. He smiled at no one and continued. A girl crossed a little later with a basket of green and the look of someone who had been awake too long. She stopped halfway and watched the ripples throw small patterns onto the underside of the boards. She touched the rail and closed her eyes. "What are you doing?" a boy asked, coming up behind her with a stick he didn't need. "Feeling it," she said. "Feeling what?" "The river through the wood," she said, opening her eyes and letting go. "It hums a little if you're quiet." He pressed his hand to the rail and scowled. "I don't hear anything." "Don't try so hard," she said, and kept walking. After 3 steps, he tried again. The hum was there, not in his ears, but in the heel of his hand. He looked up, as if someone had given him a gift and he didn't want them to see his face. The stone drifted past the mill, past a stand of alder, past boys skipping other stones and shouting when they got 5 bounces instead of 4. It learned not to complain when the river rose and carried it fast, or fell and left it half dry. A thunderstorm made the stream a louder room for an hour, and then everything went back to the level it preferred. When it rained a long time, the river moved into the grass and made new lines where it hadn't been all year. When it didn't rain, the river showed its stones to the sun and waited. Work went on. A carpenter rinsed his hands at the bank and left swirls of sawdust that settled in neat lines as if even the smallest pieces wanted to belong. A mother washed a small shirt and wrung it hard, then shook it, then folded it over a willow branch. She laughed to herself and shook her head as if a private joke had gone well. The world kept choosing to be ordinary and kept finding that ordinary was enough. One night, fog settled low, and lanterns on a flat boat threw small yellow circles onto the surface. From the deck, a song rose, not a loud song, a worker's tune keeping time, and the tone reached through water like a line and touched the stone in its shallow. The stone felt it as pressure, then as comfort, the way a hand on a shoulder says, "I'm here," without needing to be clever. Up on the hill, the temple bell sounded once. The note walked down through the fog and across the stream, and the stream answered by lifting a little, as if acknowledging a guest at the door. The gods who prefer quiet stood near and watched that exchange with a satisfaction they did not voice. They asked for nothing. They blessed what was already happening. The girl from the bridge dreamed that night. In the dream, a woman stood in the river. Hair spread around her like long lines of dark water, eyes clear as winter stars. The woman raised both hands, and the current behaved like a child ready to learn. "Let go when you can," the woman said. "Hold when you must. Know the difference. Be kind either way." The girl woke before dawn with a steady chest and no need to know why it was steady. She sat on her bed and pressed her palm to the center of her shirt until she felt the thump. Not loud, not small, simply correct. She touched the edge of the window, felt the cool, and smiled because it felt like the rail felt when she and the river had agreed about the hum. Days later, the river swelled with rain, and the town moved its chairs. People do what they have always done: raised boxes onto shelves, rolled rugs, watched the waters angle with serious faces, spoke to one another in simple sentences. "Up another inch. Mind the cable. I'll take the end." When the water receded, they rolled the rugs back, opened the windows, and made tea. Grand events came and went. Small reactions kept them human. The stone traveled in that rising, turned in that narrowing, slid in that opening. It struck a log and learned to lean. It caught behind a boulder and learned to wait. It felt itself beginning to lose its corners in a way that wasn't loss. A shape change can be a gain if it brings you closer to what you are meant to be. A fisherman with a cap bleached pale by the sun knelt at the dock and dipped both hands into the wrists. He closed his eyes. "Cold?" his nephew asked. "Good," the fisherman said. "Not cold. Good. Feels like a clean start." He tapped the base of his throat with his wet fingers and smiled at the answer his body had sent back. "What do you listen for?" the boy asked. "For it to tell me when to be patient and when to pull," the fisherman said, lifting the net and setting to work. "It's never wrong about patience." He spoke as if he were telling the river something the river already knew. He worked the knotted line with a tender focus, and the knot gave up. The monk returned to the bridge with the same slow steps. The boy from that first morning had grown a little and stood beside him. "Count?" the monk asked. "Together," the boy said. They breathed in, held, out, held. The rail, cool under their hands, hummed its quiet agreement. In that simple rhythm, the world settled. The monk didn't teach him anything complicated. He let the counting be enough. Downstream, the stone moved in small ways that mattered. It learned that the current likes to push and then let go, that corners can be softened by choosing not to fight them, that breathing, if a stone could be said to breathe, is like agreeing with the moment you're in. It rolled and found a new pocket, rolled again, found the shade under a fallen limb. A trout hung above it and corrected with the tiniest flex of a fin whenever the flow disagreed with its plans. A dragonfly knitted a path just above the water and then unknitted it, not because it meant to, but because that is what it does. On the bridge, a monk paused. He wore no shoes. He set his bare feet wide and his hands on the rail, palms down, fingers spread. He breathed in for 4, held for 4, out for 4, held for 4. He counted softly to keep the numbers polite. His hands picked up the rails cool, and his chest eased. The stream kept its line. He smiled at no one and continued. Harvest took its turn. Leaves came loose. Smoke lifted straight up on still days. The mill made a deeper sound with the new wheat. The stone passed under, listened, and kept going. A deer drank at twilight and looked up only once. A fox stepped down the bank and stepped back up when it saw the water and decided tonight was not the night for wet feet. Every small life made a choice that made sense at the time. Choices like those make a place feel lived in. Winter laid a thin ice near the edge, and the ice made a fragile window. The stone saw sky through that little pane, and learned that a reflection can be a true story told another way. The temple bell spoke once in the cold, and the note came through the ice and the water, and into the stone's body with the same sure path it had found on the foggy night. The gods still watched. They adjusted nothing. They liked how the valley carried its own weight now. Spring arrived, as if it had missed the place and meant to make up for it. Green returned too quickly to count. The river lifted its shoulders and ran easier. People on the path stopped to take off their coats and then didn't put them back on. The girl from the bridge, older again, leaned over and rubbed a damp spot on the railing with her sleeve and laughed at herself because what did it matter whether a rail was damp? Old habit, she said to the water, and the water, being water, did not answer with words, but did offer a small wave that touched the bank and then moved on. In the evening, a small flat boat slid downstream with a man singing under his breath to keep his strokes even. His song lined up with the rhythm of the oars, and the oars made 2 wet sounds per breath. And the breath took charge, and the body liked it. Breath, heartbeat, touch. The river carried the boat carried the man carried the song. Everything carried something else, and the carrying was the point. Past the last big bend, the river widened and flattened, and began to smell of far places. The reeds clicked against one another, like quiet applause. The air tasted faintly of salt. Gulls marked long loops in the sky, and spoke their opinions in a half-arguing, half-friendly tone that sounded the same every day and never seemed to bother anyone who worked there. A boy with a dented tin pail stepped into the shallows and scooped a dozen stones. He let most fall back in a short rain. One stayed in his palm. It was warm from the sun on top, cool underneath, smooth in a way his thumb liked. He rubbed it along the crease of his hand without thinking. "Good one?" his mother called from a blanket on the bank. She had bread wrapped in a cloth and a jar that caught the light like a little lantern. "It feels right," he said. "Then bring it." He crossed carefully, testing with his toes, and handed it over. She felt its weight and nodded. Not too big, not too small. A pebble that remembers where it came from and is fine with where it is. He grinned because he liked how she said things. "Can I keep it?" "You can keep it until it asks to go back. You'll know when it asks." They sat on the blanket and ate. The bread was warm from the sun where it touched the cloth. She cut it with a pocket knife she wiped on her jeans. She spread jam that smelled like summer, even though it wasn't quite summer. He took a bite, and the taste was sweet and heavy, and exactly the thing he had been wanting without knowing it. He licked a finger and looked out past the reeds to the bright line where the river's color changed and the sea began. "What does it feel like out there?" he asked. "Different," she said. "Larger. The water lifts you in another way. It smells a little like metal, a little like wind, a little like the inside of a shell you hold up to your face." He sniffed and caught a bit of that new edge. He pressed the pebble to his cheek and held it there long enough to feel its cool shift toward his skin's warmth. Touch made the object change. Touch made him aware of his own temperature, his own pulse, the way his breath wanted to match the small hummed line of the waves coming in. Back home, he set the pebble in a saucer on the kitchen windowsill with 2 feathers and a button he had found on the path. Steam from the kettle wrote letters on the glass and then erased them. He drew a smiley face with his finger and watched it fade. He picked up the pebble again because he couldn't help it. "Table," his mother said, setting down bowls that smelled of onion and thyme. "Got it," he said, and set 2 spoons and 2 forks in their old places. He put the pebble down near his plate like a third eater, and then put it in his pocket again because having it close felt better than setting it aside. They ate at a pace that matched the day. Not slow, not fast. He talked about a story from school and a problem on the blackboard that had taken most of the class a long time. He made a small face when he tried to explain the bit where the numbers had felt wrong and then right. She nodded because she had known that feeling many times. A corner that looks sharp and turns out to be gentle if you lean the right way. After dinner, he rinsed the bowls. The water ran warm and smelled faintly of the soap and the metal of the tap. He held the pebble under the stream for a second, as if introducing old water to new, and liked the way it darkened, then dried. He took it to his room and set it on the nightstand, then moved it under his pillow because his hand kept traveling there on its own. He lay back and listened. The house talked the way houses do when the evening is kind. Wood settling, a soft pipe thud, a neighbor's laugh traveling across the yard. Outside, the river made the same even remark it had made all day. He pressed his palm over the place his heart beat. He breathed with the window open a hand's width. He slid his hand under the pillow and found the pebble and held it. Breath slowed. Heartbeat steadied. Touch told his body it was safe. The world knew what to do without him telling it how. Morning, then days, then small changes that turn into larger ones before anyone thinks to name them. He carried the pebble in his pocket when he needed to think. He set it on the desk when he had to finish a thing and didn't want to, because the weight made quitting feel a little sillier. He returned it to the sill on days he felt generous and wanted the light to find it. Once, on the path by the river, he met the monk again. They stood at the rail and leaned the same way without planning it. "Still counting?" the monk asked. "When I remember," he said. "Remember now," the monk said. They did. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Not a trick, not a cure, just a way to stand with what is. "Do you know," the monk said, eyes on the water, "far upriver and far above even that, there is a story about a river that was once in the sky and had to learn how to come down gently." "No," the young man said, not embarrassed, "but I like the idea." "It is a good idea," the monk said. "The earth asked for help. A king prayed. A god offered his hair to take the first force. A goddess agreed to descend without breaking what she meant to nourish." He tapped the rail twice with 2 fingers, then smiled. "Patience makes even falling a kind of kindness." They watched a barge move with no sign of what powered it, except the certainty it would arrive. The young man took the pebble from his pocket and turned it once and put it back, not because he meant to, but because that is what the hand wanted. That evening, the kitchen smelled like tea leaves and sugar warming in milk. He lifted the kettle and poured, and the steam rose in a soft white ribbon that caught the light and then disappeared into the room. He tasted the first sip and felt his shoulders let go. He opened the back door, and the air held a clean smell from a small shower that had moved through. Wet dust turned to something faintly sweet, a rinsed sidewalk, a leaf's skin still sleek. He stood there until the cup was half empty. He carried the pebble to the sill and placed it where the remaining light would rest on it. Outside, the river lifted its surface once, as if nodding to the night. Far above the line of the hills, beyond the last of the weather any of them would see, another river waited. Some called it a path in the sky. Some called it a goddess. In the old story, the gods made room. A king kept his prayer, and the descent began like gentle rain. The young man didn't know the names. He didn't need to. He only needed to feel how the day had taught him to slow, and to see how that slowing made room for what came next. He closed the window. He set the cup down. He lay in the good dark with one hand under the pillow and one hand over his heart. Breath, heartbeat, touch. The pebble rested against his palm, warm now, not from the sun, but from him. He thought of the stream at the ledge, the moss, the eddy, the bridge, the rail, the dock, the reeds, the line where the river changes its name and is still itself. He thought of the story the monk had mentioned, and the picture formed without effort. A bright river above the world. A god lifting hair like a net to soften a fall. A goddess leaning like dawn, leaning on a windowsill. He smiled. Not wide, not small, enough. We leave him there, and we leave the stone where it is useful, and we leave the river to do what it has always done. We turn, for a time, from the small to the greater path. Somewhere above, the first strands of a sacred current gather, and the world lifts its face to meet them. A gentle descent is about to begin. At the edge of the sky, where the light is clear and steady, a river shone like a long road of silver. The gods called her Ganga. She moved across the heavens with a calm, bright face, and the stars reflected in her surface the way lamps reflect in a polished floor. From up there, the world below looked simple: patches of field and forest, a line of mountains like folded cloth, villages like small beads laid along brown paths. Ganga watched without hurrying. She was made to carry things, and she carried the stars, the moon, and the quiet of long nights. The gods gathered in a circle not far from Ganga's course. They spoke in low voices, not because they feared being heard, but because a problem becomes easier when spoken gently. "The earth is asking," said one god, looking down at a dry stretch where a riverbed waited like an empty bowl. "A king is asking," added another. "His name is Bhagirath. His people need rest. His ancestors need release. He prays with patience." From above, they could see him, a small figure in a simple cloth, seated on a flat stone beside a thin ribbon of water that sometimes vanished in the heat. He breathed evenly. He did not make a show of his devotion. He stayed. Brahma, the creator, turned his palm toward the heavenly river. "Ganga," he said, as if speaking to a daughter who had been honest and kind for a very long time. "The earth asks for your grace. Will you descend?" Ganga listened. In the stillness, she saw villages with cracked wells. She saw ash scattered at riverbanks with no river to carry it. She saw children following their mothers with empty pots. She saw the king who prayed not for power, but for help for the tired and the thirsty. She had always been a river for the heavens. Now she was being asked to become a river for the earth. "If I fall from the sky," she said, "I will hit with force. I will break what I wish to bless." "That is true," Brahma replied. "We must ask for help from one who can bear the weight of first arrival. Ask Shiva to receive you. Let his hair take your fall. After that, you can be gentle." Ganga glanced toward the white mountains where Shiva kept his quiet home. "If he agrees," she said, "I will go." Brahma lifted his hand in blessing. The circle of gods loosened. The meeting ended not with a shout, but with the same calm in which it began. In the heaven above the world, Ganga turned her face toward the mountains. On the earth below, King Bhagiratha rose from his flat stone just as the sun reached the top of a nearby tree. He had prayed at that spot for a long time, long enough for people on the path to say, "The king is there," as if the stone and the man had become part of the same map. He was not dressed like a king. He wore a simple cloth and a thin thread that lay against his skin. His hair had gone a little gray at the temples, not from worry, but from time spent outside under honest weather. A boy from the village approached with a clay cup. "Water, Maharaj," the boy said, using the polite word he had learned from his father. "Thank you," Bhagiratha said, and took the cup with both hands. He drank slowly, the way he breathed, steady in, steady out. He looked at the surface before he sipped, as if checking that the water wanted to be lifted. "Your name?" "Harish," the boy said, pushing hair out of his eyes. "Harish," the king repeated, tasting the sound. "Tell your mother this helped." He tapped his chest with 2 fingers, breath and heartbeat, and handed the cup back. The boy's face brightened over a small task done well. He ran. An older woman came next, barefoot, carrying a string bag. She set it down, lifted her hands in greeting, and said, "You sit long, Maharaj. Does your back forgive you?" "It does," he said, "and when it doesn't, I forgive it back." She laughed. "Good answer. Eat." She took a flat bread from the bag and a small leaf packet of salt and herbs. He tore the bread, dipped the edge, and ate. The taste was clean and sharp, and his mouth watered in a way that reminded him he was a person, not only a king or a prayer of prayers. "Your family?" she asked. "My ancestors," he said softly. "I want to help them. I want to help all of us. There is a river in the sky. I am asking her to come down." She glanced up, as if she might see it. The sky was a strong blue. A hawk circled, making the slow spiral that never looked rushed. "If she comes," the woman said, "tell her she is welcome here." "I will," he said, and smiled. He returned to his stone and sat. He set his hands on his knees, palms down. He breathed in for 4 beats, held for 4, breathed out for 4, held for 4, then began again. Breath, heartbeat, touch. He felt the ground under his seat. He felt the sun lay a warm hand on the back of his neck. He heard the small sounds that made the day. The call of a mynah, the creak of a cartwheel, a child's brief cry followed by silence once the child had been gathered up and soothed. He prayed, and his prayer had the shape of a simple conversation. He did not try to impress. He did not bargain. He asked for help the way you ask a strong friend to lift the other end of a heavy table. Days were like this: breathing, meeting, eating when food was offered, sleeping on a mat rolled out beside the stone. The seasons changed. A small river appeared and then disappeared. Bhagirath did not leave when the bed ran dry. He stayed. At last, on a morning when the air looked particularly clean, a quiet arrived that felt different from the ordinary quiet of early day. It was like the stillness right before rain, expectant but not tense. Bhagirath looked up and found that he was not alone. Brahma stood across the streambed, bright as noon, calm as shade. "Your prayers have been heard," Brahma said. Bhagirath stood and bowed. "Thank you," he said. He did not ask when or how. He had learned something about time. "Ganga will descend," Brahma said, "but her strength is great. Ask Shiva to receive her first. Only then will her waters reach the earth gently." "I will go," Bhagirath said. "Take your patience with you," Brahma added, as if reminding a traveler to pack water for a long road, and was gone. Bhagirath turned to the village. He told the elders what had been said. They listened with the concentration they gave to weather and to seed. No one argued. A carpenter offered a stout staff. The old woman who had given him bread pressed a thread-wrapped pouch into his hand. "Salt," she said, "bring it back as a story." "I will," he said, tying the pouch to his belt. He set out for the mountains. The path climbed from scrub and thorn to pine and rock. The air thinned and sharpened. The sky seemed closer. At a shepherd's hut, a boy with wind-chapped cheeks lifted a hand and said, "Where are you going?" "To ask a blessing," Bhagirath said. "Take this," the boy said, handing over a wool scarf. "The wind bites at the pass." Bhagirath wound the scarf around his neck. "It already feels kinder," he said. The boy looked pleased. Small gifts change both hands. The climb was steady work. Bhagirath's breath moved in his chest like a bellows, and he kept it even by counting steps between breaths. At a cold stream, he knelt and drank from his palm. The water shocked his tongue and then soothed it. He splashed his face and laughed once at how awake the cold had made him. He pressed his fingers lightly to his temples until the beat he felt there matched the beat at his wrist. Heartbeat saying, "I'm here," so the rest of him could relax. On the third day, he reached a plateau where the snow lay late in the year. A ring of stones marked a place where many visitors had stood and asked for the same thing in different words. Bhagirath set down his staff, loosened the scarf, and waited without announcing himself. The wind moved. The mountains stood. The quiet deepened, in the way quiet deepens right before someone kind enters a room. Shiva appeared without escort or sound. His eyes were not severe. They were clear, like a pool with nothing to hide. His hair was matted and strong, gathered high. It looked like it could hold worlds, and had done so before. He acknowledged Bhagirath with a nod that landed like a hand to the shoulder. "Welcome," Shiva said. "Lord," Bhagirath replied, bowing. You have come far, Shiva said. For help, Bhagirath said. Ganga will descend. The earth is not ready to receive her first fall. Will you take it? Shiva's expression did not change, but something like humor passed through his eyes. I will, he said, without making a ceremony of it, if you are ready to guide her afterward. I am, Bhagirath said. Then guide people too, Shiva added. Water can carry what we give it, joy and grief both. Teach them how to meet it. I will try, Bhagirath said, because he was honest. Shiva stepped closer. He lifted his right hand and laid 2 fingers lightly on Bhagirath's forehead. The touch was cool, like stone in shade. Bhagirath felt his breath slow and deepen. He felt his heartbeat become a steady drum under the touch. He did not feel smaller. He felt held by something big enough to hold many things at once. You will need this when the first rush comes, Shiva said. Keep your breath. Keep your ground. People will look to you before they remember to look to themselves. I understand, Bhagirath said. He did not understand everything, but he understood enough. Shiva looked toward the sky. Tell Ganga I am ready. Bhagirath bowed again. Thank you, he said, and meant it as deeply as he knew how. He descended by a different path because the mountain gave him one. At a bend, he met a group of ascetics seated near a small fire. They made room. One poured tea from a blackened pot into a clay cup and handed it to Bhagirath with both hands. The tea smelled of leaves and smoke and something like cardamom. He drank and felt warmth move out to his fingers. I'm going to tell a river she is welcome, he said. Good work, one of them said. Remember to sleep, another added. People who forget rest say foolish things at the important hour. I'll rest, Bhagirath promised. Down from the high cold into the milder air he came, and then into the known heat of the plains. When he entered his city, people who recognized him set down their baskets and raised a hand. He did not raise both arms and shout. He smiled and said what was true. Help is coming. There will be a first great rush. Then there will be enough for all. When? A man asked. Soon, Bhagirath said. Begin to prepare. Bhagirath turned to the village. He told the elders what had been said. They listened with the concentration they gave to weather and to seed. No one argued. A carpenter offered a stout staff. The old woman who had given him bread pressed a thread-wrapped pouch into his hand. Salt, she said, bring it back as a story. I will, he said, tying the pouch to his belt. He set out for the mountains. The path climbed from scrub and thorn to pine and rock. The air thinned and sharpened. The sky seemed closer. At a shepherd's hut, a boy with wind-chapped cheeks lifted a hand and said, Where are you going? To ask a blessing, Bhagirath said. Take this, the boy said, handing over a wool scarf. The wind bites at the pass. Bhagirath wound the scarf around his neck. It already feels kinder, he said. The boy looked pleased. Small gifts change both hands. They did, not in a frenzy, but with the steadiness he had learned and brought home. They mended their banks, They cleared the old channels where reeds had grown too thick. Families swept small shrines. Women showed girls how to fold cloth for carrying pots in safety. Men, a little older than boys, practiced carrying stretchers because someone would strain a back in the first days and need help. The elder who liked lists made one on a stone with a stub of charcoal and nodded as people pointed at items and said, "I can take that," or "We too will take that." At evening, Bhagirath walked the line of the dry riverbed. He touched the stones the way you touch the wall of a house you have lived in a long time. He knelt, pressed his palm to the packed earth, and felt the heat it had kept from the day. He closed his eyes, and the map of the bed drew itself behind his eyelids. Curves and narrows, the wide place where children once played, the bend where his grandfather had liked to stand and speak to anyone who came by. He breathed in and out and imagined water moving there again, not like a storm, but like an arrival that makes sense. He opened his eyes and felt ready. That night, the elders gathered in the courtyard of a house that had shade in the afternoon and held the cool in the night. They ate simple food: rice steamed in a broad pot, a lentil stew thickened and sent up a good smell. A small plate of pickled lemon went around and came back without argument. They ate, talked, and did not try to solve everything at once. "My granddaughter has never seen the big river," one woman said. "She will learn to be careful." "My father will be happy," a man said. He wanted his ashes to take that journey. He knew it might take time. "We will show the little ones to step in and step out," said another. "No pushing, no showing off." Bhagirath listened and said little. He was not in charge of every detail. He didn't need to be. The work was already spread out among people who knew how to hold a task without making it smaller or larger than it should be. When the moon rose, he excused himself and went to the stone where he had prayed. He sat again. He laid his hands on his knees and began the old count. Breath in, hold. Breath out, hold. The sounds of the village thinned. A cow shifted. A door thudded softly. A baby fussed once and then settled when a mother's hand found a back and rubbed. Breath, heartbeat, touch. The night felt close but not heavy. Far away, at the edge of the sky, Ganga stood where heaven's bright path met the beginning of the great fall. She had spoken with Shiva. She had turned the promise in her mind until it felt simple and firm. She had been a river for the stars. She would be a river for the earth. There would be a first strong moment, and she would let Shiva take it. After that, she would do what she did best: carry and cleanse, move and make room, touch and teach. Before she moved, she looked down. She saw villages where lamps glowed like small moons. She saw Bhagirath sitting still as a post, breathing the way you breathe when you mean to keep your head. She saw a boy sleeping with a clay cup beside his bed because he had decided it was a brave thing to bring a king water. She saw an old woman whose hands made food taste like rest. She saw the dry riverbed like a line someone had written and left unfinished. Ganga looked toward the mountain. Shiva stood already, patient, Hands loose, hair lifted a little by the wind that lives at that height. She nodded once, and though he did not move, he answered her. She turned back to the path and took one step forward. Not yet the fall, not yet the thunder, just the decision that would make the rest easy. In the city, a breeze moved through the courtyard and lifted the edge of a sleeping child's hair. Bhagirath felt it touch his cheek, cool and steady. He opened his eyes, not because something was wrong, but because something was right. He stood, stretched his back, and walked home along the quiet path. At his door he paused, placed his palm to the wood, and felt that small thrum every door learns from the people who go in and out. He lay down on his mat. He set his hand over his heart and counted 4 breaths, then 4 more. He did not plan speeches for morning. He did not rehearse. He let the night cover the work he had done and the work that would come. In the sky, the stars held their places. On the mountain, Shiva stood ready. At the bright edge of heaven, Ganga stood ready too. The world was set, and the first light touch of a new wind moved over the plain like a promise kept. He slept. Dawn opened its quiet hand over the plain. A soft breeze crossed the courtyards and lifted the edge of sleeping cloths. Bhagiratha woke with the sense that a promise had stepped closer. He sat up, pressed his palm over his heart, and felt the steady drum that had kept him company through the long months. Breath, heartbeat, touch. He rose, washed his face, and walked to the stone where he had spent so many mornings. A few others stirred at the same hour. The boy, Harish, carried a clay cup and a grin he could not hide. The old woman with the clever hands tied her hair back and looked at the sky like a friend returning from a trip. The elders took their places where they could see the riverbed, not to command, but to be seen, anchors in familiar spots. At evening, Bhagiratha walked the line of the dry riverbed. He touched the stones the way you touch the wall of a house you have lived in a long time. He knelt, pressed his palm to the packed earth, and felt the heat it had kept from the day. He closed his eyes, and the map of the bed drew itself behind his eyelids. Curves and narrows, the wide place where children once played, the bend where his grandfather had liked to stand and speak to anyone who came by. He breathed in and out and imagined water moving there again, not like a storm, but like an arrival that makes sense. He opened his eyes and felt ready. High above, at the edge of heaven, Ganga stepped into her descent. She did not fall like a stone. She moved like a decision kept, sure, clean, and whole. Her brightness gathered, then stretched, then became motion. From the mountains, Shiva lifted his head. He did not raise a weapon. He raised his hair. When river meets mountain from a height, the first moment matters. Ganga reached him with a force that could shatter rock, and Shiva received her with the same ease he would give a child being lowered from a high step. His hair spread and braided itself, a living snare that did not bind, but guided. The flood became 1,000 ribbons. The crash became a touch. The roar became a voice a body could stand inside without fear. Bhagiratha felt the ground answer at a distance, a small hum through the soles of his feet, not a shaking to run from, a signal that something larger than the village had taken a careful step. He set his palm to the old stone and found the same hum in the rock. "She comes," he said, not loudly. It was enough. The first waters reached the upper gullies, cold, clean, swift, and already learning the valley's grammar. Thin streams merged, gathered, turned, tested a bank, and, where the bank was strong, slid on. Where the bank was weak, they placed the silt they carried, not as a punishment, but as repair. Goats on a ridge watched with the calm of animals who trust what is familiar. Birds turned in a slow circle and then settled again. Runners came down the slope. A shepherd, a woodcutter, a boy with wind-red cheeks. "It's true," they panted, smiling. "It's the big water, but it isn't cruel. A mist on our faces. It felt—" None of them had the right word. One pressed his hand to his chest and simply nodded. Breath, heartbeat, touch. "Steady," Bhagirath said, smiling back. "Walk with the news. Don't run and frighten the children. We have time." The village gathered, not as a crowd pushing to prove they were first, but in lines that had been thought through. Women brought the old ropes and tied them at waist height along the safer bank. Men whose backs were good took the first baskets of stones to shore up a low place. The elder with the charcoal list checked off items with a small, satisfied sound. On the opposite bank, the baker's wife, who liked to talk to the wheel and to dogs, wiped her hands and stepped out with a cloth folded longwise under a pot. "I want to watch with my tea," she said. "If you cannot honor a morning with tea, what good is a god's visit?" No one argued. She poured into 2 cups and passed one to the old woman, who blew across the surface and smiled at the scent. The water reached the bridge as a moving mirror. It took the space like someone entering a room where they have been invited and feel no need to impress. It turned a log over, tasted the old mud, found the channel that had slept, and woke it. Harish stood on the safe step with his clay cup and looked up at Bhagiratha. "Can I touch it?" "You can," Bhagiratha said, "with care. 2 fingers first. Let it tell you how strong it is today." Harish knelt, reached, and set 2 fingertips into the flow. Cold climbed his skin and lived there. It wasn't a shock, it was a truth. He drew in a short breath, then let it out slowly as Bhagiratha had taught him. He placed his whole palm in the water, and the current pressed, the way a friend presses your hand to say, "I'm here." He laughed once, a sound with no edge on it, and stood. His cheeks were bright. He wiped his hand on his shirt and decided not to regret the damp patch. People came with copper pots and wooden ladles, not to hoard, but to begin. The first cupped water was carried to small shrines and poured over stones that had seen long waits. The second cupped water rinsed the steps where feet would stand. The third cupped water went to the oldest of the elders, who wet his lips and said, "I feel my mother." Everyone laughed softly because they felt something like that too, and were glad someone had said it. The air filled with gentle busyness. A rope line taught children the habit of holding on as they stepped down and up. An uncle stood with 2 nephews and made them say the sentences back. "One at a time. Step where the foot can feel. If you slip, hold the rope and sit." They repeated dutifully, then did the steps with exaggerated care until he grinned and waved them away. Bhagiratha walked the bank, not like a general, more like a host moving through a courtyard to ask whether anyone needed another ladle or a place to sit. He knelt beside an old man with a clay jar and a folded cloth. "Your father?" Bhagiratha asked. "My wife," the old man said, eyes full but steady. "She wanted the river's path." Bhagiratha nodded. "Take your time." They walked together to the water. The old man dipped the jar, held it against his chest until his breathing matched the slow fold of the current, then poured. The ashes met the surface and softened, then widened, then moved on. The old man pressed his palm to the wet rock and closed his eyes. The current pressed back, firm and kind. He nodded to no one, wiped his face with the cloth, and stepped away. The first day filled with such scenes. A mother brought a child with a rash and dabbed the coolness along the child's arms while singing to mark a rhythm. A farmer rinsed his hoe and stood a long time watching silt lay down in the right places. A potter filled a jar and tapped its side with a knuckle. The tone came back sweet and true. The baker's wife refilled the kettle and laughed at the way steam smelled now, clean with a hint of wet stone, like rain arriving inside a house that welcomed it. At midday, Bhagiratha crossed to a low rise where he could see upstream. The water came in a wide sheet now, safely spread, the first rush tamed into a strong stride. Far above, the mountain sat, and above that, the sky. He closed his eyes and thanked Shiva with the simple words he used for all thanks. He spoke to Ganga politely. "Welcome," he said aloud, "because speaking matters. We will learn from you." As if in answer, a fine mist lifted from the center run and moved across the gathered people. It landed on faces and arms and hair with the lightest touch. Women smiled and lifted their chins the way people do when the breeze arrives. Men blinked and didn't mind. Children stuck out tongues and pretended they could taste the sky. The touch was the message. It made the body believe that the body belonged here. Runners came down the slope. A shepherd, a woodcutter, a boy with wind-red cheeks. "It's true," they panted, smiling. "It's the big water, but it isn't cruel. A mist on our faces. It felt—" None of them had the right word. One pressed his hand to his chest and simply nodded. Breath, heartbeat, touch. "Steady," Bhagiratha said, smiling back. "Walk with the news. Don't run and frighten the children. We have time." The village gathered, not as a crowd pushing to prove they were first, but in lines that had been thought through. Women brought the old ropes and tied them at waist height along the safer bank. Men whose backs were good took the first baskets of stones to shore up a low place. The elder with the charcoal list checked off items with a small, satisfied sound. Toward evening, Bhagiratha stood at the place where the current bent and watched it lean into the turn. A man in saffron stopped beside him and folded his hands. "You kept your breath," the man said, not as a question. "I tried," Bhagiratha said. "Keep it again," the man said, "because your work is not finished when the story is pretty." People will bring grief and joy to this water. Teach them to bring care, too. I will keep asking, Bhagirath said. Good, the man replied, and moved on. Night came without fuss. Lamps lit the steps in steady pools. Families ate on their thresholds. The day smelled of river and smoke and fried dough. From a doorway, the old woman waved Bhagiratha over. Eat, she commanded. He did. The stew tasted of lentil and garlic and a spice he could not name. The flatbread carried the heat of the pan. The pickled lime caught in the back of his throat and made his eyes water a little, which felt honest and fine. He slept, not from exhaustion, but from the relief of a weight shared. Morning began earlier the next day. News had walked along paths faster than carts. More people arrived, not in a rush, but with the bright faces of those who believe their feet are going to a good place. Bhagiratha met them with the same sentences. There is time. The water is strong, but not cruel. We hold the rope. We help the small. We keep our breath. At the upper bend, a family came with a bamboo bier. The eldest daughter carried the front end without asking to be excused from the work. At the bank, they set the bier down, untied the cloth, and lifted the ash-filled pot. The daughter looked to Bhagiratha once, one small question, one small request. He nodded. She tipped the pot, and the dust slid out in a pale line, broke into the skin of the river, and went. She placed her wet hand on her own face, over her eyes, then over her mouth, then over her heart. Touch to see, touch to speak, touch to keep. Thank you, she murmured, to the water, to the day, to the work being finished. The words did not need direction to find their place. By afternoon, the banks had become classrooms. Older women showed younger women how to carry a full pot on the head and how not to snap the neck with a sudden tilt. Men with rope burns explained how a simple loop around the wrist could keep a slip from becoming a fall. A boy showed two smaller boys how to walk sideways up the steps because it was easier on the knees. He did it twice with exaggerated knees to make them laugh, then did it properly so they would copy the right thing. Bhagiratha kept moving, kept listening, kept reminding himself not to try to touch everything with his own hands. When a dispute flickered, two men arguing over the order of filling, he stepped in not with a rule, but with a suggestion. Trade places and count to 20 for each other. They did, and the quarrel fell apart like a knot that was mostly tension. He made a note to set a second rope line at the wider step. At sunset, he climbed the small hill again and looked to the mountains. Shiva was not visible, but the calm he had placed in Bhagiratha's body remained. Bhagiratha spoke again, simple words, the kind that do not make a poor show of gratitude. Thank you for your strength, he said to Shiva. Thank you for your patience, he said to Ganga. The air cooled across his face. He looked down the length of the river and saw what would come next. Tributaries joining, canals filled for fields, cities downriver waking to a sound they had not heard in a long time. The next weeks confirmed it. Where Ganga passed, wells cleared. Crops that had been planted in hope reached water, and leaves lifted in clear relief. Washerwomen learned the new edges of the steps, and taught them to the next newcomers with the quick hands of people who like passing on useful things. Priests adapted rituals to the river's new rhythm. Fishermen learned where the current wrapped around a fallen tree, and where it left a backwater for small boats. The smell of the place changed. Morning carried wet clay and crushed leaves, and the faint sweetness of jasmine from a doorway garland. Midday carried warm stone and bread on a griddle. Evening carried smoke from dung cakes, the pepper in a neighbor's pot, and, when the wind came right, the cool note of the river itself. Clean, a little mineral, like rain that had decided to stay a while. Taste changed too. Tea tasted clearer. Fruit tasted louder. A woman dripped a little river water onto her tongue before tasting her stew and nodded, as if that drop had taught her something about salt she had forgotten. Children discovered that a simple brass cup of cool water after play could stop a quarrel faster than a long speech. One morning, Harish brought his clay cup and found Bhagiratha sitting with his back against the old stone, eyes closed, breathing as always. "Do you ever get tired of the same breath?" Harish asked, half teasing. "If I keep it," Bhagiratha said, opening one eye, "I don't get as tired of anything else." Harish sat, copied the posture, and lasted through 2 cycles before scratching his knee. "I felt it," he said, "the quiet." "Good," Bhagiratha said. "Remember it when the bank is crowded." "Will it always be this calm?" Harish asked, glancing at the steady water. "Not always," Bhagiratha said. "There will be days when the river is loud. There will be days when people are loud. On those days, we hold the rope tighter and we speak softer." Harish nodded, storing the sentences the way children store stones. That is, with a simple belief they will be useful later. That afternoon, a traveler came through with stories from upriver. The mountains echoing with the first rush, the spray on the face like cold cloth, the way shepherds had stood in a line and laughed without knowing why. At night, a different traveler came through with stories from downriver. The old channels waking, the dry ghats finding their use again, the sound of singing rising from steps that had been quiet. The village listened and found their own day reflected in both tales. Changes settled into habits. A set of boys drew lines in the dust to show where rope should be tied so the knots would reach hands of different heights. 2 sisters invented a turn-taking song for filling pots at the rope and taught it to the children so the rhythm would do the work of an argument before it started. Mothers learned when to bring the small ones, when the light on the steps was kindest. Bhagiratha grew thinner in the way people grow who walk all day and forget to sit unless someone puts a bowl in their hands. The old woman scolded him with affection and fattened him with another ladle. "Eat before wisdom makes you weightless," she said. He laughed and ate, and the food tasted like bean, cumin, and the gift of being told what to do by someone who loved him enough to do it. As the river settled into the land and the land settled around the river, Bhagiratha felt a permission to do one more thing. He walked upstream to a bend where the bank was quiet and offered a small, private prayer. Not a request, a thanks and a promise. "You are here," he said to Ganga. "We will hold our side of this friendship. We will keep the steps clean. We will teach the little ones. When we carry grief to you, we will carry it with care. When we carry joy, we will remember we are not the only ones carrying joy today. The river answered, in the way rivers answer. The edge lapped once at his toes, cool and sure. The touch reached his skin, his bones, his breath. He held it as long as he needed to, the way you hold a hand at a doorway before letting go. Weeks became a season. A map of new routes drew itself in the village without anyone needing to hang it on a wall. Water came at morning and again at evening with a certain temper, and people had learned its mood. A boy who once avoided chores volunteered to sweep the steps at dawn because he liked how the wet stone felt under his feet, and because the old woman had praised his lines as straight enough to respect. Vendors adapted. The tea seller moved his cart closer to the rope and learned to balance 2 kettles, one for boiling, one for keeping. He added a pinch of crushed cardamom for the first cups after sunrise and watched as faces relaxed at the smell. The fried sweet seller discovered a place where the breeze carried the smell of sugar farther and made a habit of arriving when the first morning bathers came up the steps. His trays emptied in order, and the sound of teeth breaking a thin crust became part of the morning. Work changed in small, good ways. The potter shaped vessels with mouths a little wider for easier filling at the rope, and stamped a faint wave at the lip so people could find the angle that spilled least. The carpenter added an extra rung to stools so that old knees could rest while still staying high enough to see the water. The washerman learned the new best stones by name: Rama stone for saris, Bella stone for sheets, and argued with humor about the virtues of shade versus sun. Rituals deepened. People still brought ashes and stories to the river, but they also brought thanks. A woman came with a small basket of flowers from her courtyard and let them go one by one. "For yesterday's quarrel ending well," she said, "for my son finding work, for my sister's baby finally sleeping." She smiled at the water as if it were a neighbor leaning on a low wall. Ganga moved each petal along without making it important or unimportant, because she knew how to carry many things at once. Children learned respect not as a speech, but as a set of actions. A boy took a step back when a grandmother approached the rope. A girl placed her hand on a toddler's head at the top of the stairs and said, "Hold," and the toddler held. When a woman slipped and sat on the step with a small gasp, 3 hands found her, one at elbow, one at shoulder, one at the back of the hand that gripped the rope. Touch, then words. She stood, laughed at herself, and tried again. On a clear afternoon, Bhagiratha walked farther downriver than usual. He wanted to see how Ganga carried herself in the wide places. Fields stretched out, green showing where brown had been. On a far bank, a group of boys practiced throwing a small net, missing and missing until they didn't. The net landed right once, and their shout rose, and then softened because the place taught softness. A pair of cranes lifted and crossed to a sandbar. The world held its shape without strain. As he walked, he came to a place where 2 tributaries met Ganga. The waters met with different colors, one a little darker from a forest, one pale and quick from a stony run. They came together, hesitated for the span of a breath, then slipped into each other and became one current. The surface showed a seam for a time, then hid it. On the bank, people had built a small platform to watch and to offer food to travelers. He stood and listened to the sound, the tone of 3 voices blending to make one note that no single voice could shape alone. A woman at the platform spoke to him, not knowing him, only seeing a man pleased to be where he was. "You can sit," she said. "We keep a pot of rice for anyone who is moving with the river." "Thank you," he said, and took a bowl. The steam rose with a smell that pulled a memory from long ago. Rice with a little ghee, a pinch of salt, the smoke from the clay stove. He ate and felt the particular calm that simple food in the right place brings. "Do you come here often?" he asked. "When the rivers meet," she said. "I like to be here when voices blend. It helps the house stay peaceful later." She shook her head at herself, smiling at her logic that needed no defense. He sat and watched as men came to wash their hands before returning to their carts, as women let their skirts soak for a minute to cool their legs, as boys and girls took turns scooping water and pouring it back just to watch the different colors mix. No one hurried the joining. The rivers took the time they needed to recognize one another. Bhagiratha rose, bowed to the place the way you bow to an elder whose lesson has gone in without resistance, and began the walk home. As he went, he thought about other meetings, people, stories, duties, and rest. He realized that the work was shifting, less about bringing and more about keeping. He felt no loss in that. The keeping would suit him. It was a different kind of strength. That night, the village held a quiet celebration. Not drums and torches, lamps, food, and the good talk that follows shared work. The air smelled of coriander, cumin, and sweet jaggery melting in a pan. Someone steeped milk with ginger. Someone else brought a jar of mango pickle that made noses wrinkle and smiles widen. Children ran in lines that stayed clear of the rope and the steps without being told. The old woman placed 3 laddus in Bhagiratha's hand and told him he had earned 4 and would do better to save one for morning. He bit one, and the sugar and cardamom opened across his tongue. He laughed at the simple joy of it and at the way taste could tell a day's story as well as any words. He poured water into a brass cup and drank. It was cool and clean and had the faint mineral of a river just out of the mountain's hand. He wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and felt the evening air dry the damp skin. Touch closed the circle. When the lamps were out and the families had gone to their beds, Bhagiratha returned to his stone. He sat because that was where the story had begun for him. He placed one hand on the stone, one hand over his heart, and breathed with the river. In, 4. Hold, 4. Out, 4. Hold, 4. The count did not make the moment important. It made the moment simple enough to hold. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in every direction. Up to the mountain where Shiva had stood, across to the river who had learned to enter gently, down to the people who had kept their side of the work, forward to the days when this calm would be tested and kept again. He felt no need to be more eloquent. He stood, stretched, and walked home. The river went on, as rivers do. It carried what it was given: lamps, prayers, laughter, grief. None of it made larger or smaller than it was. All of it moved toward the sea. Along the way, streams joined, each bringing its own tone, and the current changed by becoming more itself. Where 2 met, there was a brief seam. Where 3 met, there was a small music. One morning, Bhagirath stood again at the place of confluence and listened. He heard the three voices fold into one. He watched people pause, as if the waters joining had reminded them how to stand close without crowding. He smiled because he understood something he hadn't had words for before. A meeting of waters is a meeting of stories, and the sound they make together is the sound the world uses to lull itself into rest. Far away, beyond the lands he knew, there were other meeting places, other bends where three rivers touched and spoke. People gathered at those places too, quietly, to hear the low conversation of the currents. They brought their own names and customs, and still felt the same thing in the chest and the palms: breath, heartbeat, touch. We follow the sound of joining now, not in a hurry, not with fanfare, across fields, over hills, and along paths we have not walked before, to a far country where three ancient rivers meet. There, it is said, the spirits of the waters sit together at dusk and share their old stories, and those who sleep nearby dream in the language of currents. We'll go to that shore next and listen. From high above the hills, the country looked stitched together by three bright threads. One ran quick from the east, pale and lively, flickering across stones as if it were always laughing. One came down from the north, clear and cold, keeping its line even when the land tried to turn it. The third moved up from the west, dark with peat and steady as a careful drum. For as long as people could remember, and longer than that, the three rivers met in one long curve of shining water, and made a place that could hold a secret without breaking it. In old time, the first keepers of the land had set a simple law there. When the days grew long, and when the days grew short, and on quiet evenings between, the rivers would bring their stories to the meeting place. Not for judgment, not for history, for balance. They would speak of what they had carried, joy and grief, small kindnesses, the weight of old names, and the telling would lighten the load for the journey on to the sea. The god hosts of the green hills, silent now as they had long been, watched from the oaks and from the backs of the stones, and did not interfere. They kept only the space, a low bank of flat rock, a ring of hazel trees, and a midstream sandbar shaped like a listening ear. At sunset, the three rivers wore three colors. The East River, called the Hazel, took the light on its ripples and dropped it back in quick coins. The North River, called the Glass, held the sky so clearly that clouds forgot which side they belonged on. The West River, called the Black, turned amber at the edges where it thinned, but kept a brown heart that promised depth. Where they met, you could see the seam for a breath, the pale, the clear, the dark. Then the water stitched itself into one current and ran on as if that had always been its shape. The first gulls of evening crossed low. A heron lifted from the shallows like someone taking care not to wake a sleeping child. On the sandbar, otters rolled and then left as if they had been told politely that company was coming. A light wind made small ripples on the surface and died in the hazel leaves, and for a breath the whole place held still, as if it were remembering something important. This was the hour the old stories pointed to, at the meeting of the waters, when day softened and the river skin turned to silver. The spirits of the three rivers would sit in the edges of the current, wearing whatever shapes made listening easy for human hearts, and they would speak. Those who slept nearby would dream in time with the flow, and rise rested, even if they did not recall what they had heard. Rowan the ferryman felt the shift before he saw it. He was setting his pole against the piling of the small dock when the wood under his palm sent him a soft, familiar thrum. He laid his hand there a breath longer, matched his chest to the rhythm, and smiled. "Evenings, kind," he said to no one in particular, and to the river in particular. He checked the planks, ran his palm along the gunwale the way a man pats a horse before he climbs on, and looked upriver to see who would come down the path at this hour. They came in ones and twos as they always did on the right evenings. A small figure first, Isla, the seamstress's daughter, with a basket on her arm and a worry at the corner of her mouth that she hadn't been able to hide all day. Behind her, her father, Eamon, a quiet man with hands that showed the half-moons of needle pricks and dye stains that never quite washed out. A harpist named Bran walked with them, his instrument wrapped against the damp, humming to himself in a way that made the humming part of the air. Old Nessa came last, the way old people come when the path is known. Not fast, not slow, just correct, with a walking stick that had worn its grip to the shape of her hand. Rowan lifted 2 fingers in greeting. "You're in time," he said. "The rivers are awake for talking." "They always are," Nessa said. "But some nights we're better at listening." She reached the dock and set her hand on the piling the way Rowan had. The thrum answered her too, and she nodded as if something had been confirmed that didn't need words. Ayla leaned over the edge and looked at the water. Sight came first, as it does. She could see the pale quick of the hazel coming in over stones, the cold clear of the glass sliding down like a polished blade, and the dark strong of the black easing in as if it had all the time in the world. The seam showed itself. She held her breath without meaning to. Then the seam blurred and was gone, and the surface smoothed. "Do you hear it?" Rowan asked her. "I hear the small things," Ayla said. "The water on the pebbles, the cord on your boat, Bran's humming." "You will hear one more when we reach the bank," Nessa said. "The part that sounds like the place speaking to itself." Eamon set his basket down and rolled his shoulders, then touched his chest with 2 fingers, breath, heartbeat, while he counted to settle his thoughts. "We'll cross and sit on the low stones," he said, half to Isla, half to himself. His voice had the tone of a plan kept simple on purpose. Bran lifted his wrapped harp and smiled. "I'll sit behind you," he said. "If I play, it will be quiet. If I don't, it will be quieter." Rowan had the skiff only half-tied by habit. It was a river that asked for readiness, not for rush. He steadied the hull with 1 foot and put out a hand. "Step when your foot knows," he said. "Hold here if you need to. Mind the gap. It's small until it isn't." Ayla set her foot, felt the give, and let her other foot follow. Touch tells the truth faster than thought. She took Rowan's hand, not because she doubted herself, but because it felt right to share the balance. Eamon came next, then Nessa, whose stick went aboard first like a polite guest checking the floor, and Bran last, the harp over his shoulder like another person who needed a safe place. Rowan pushed off. The boat made the small, hollow sound boats make when they step away from land, and the water gathered under it with a kindness that had been taught by long practice. Sound rose to meet them, the low conversation of current on hull, a lap against the stern, the quick silver talk where the hazel met the glass, the slower bass where the black slid along the bank. Someone across the water lit a lamp, and a yellow square opened on the inn's wall, steady and sure. "Will they show themselves?" Isla asked. "They will be themselves," Nessa said. "Sometimes that looks like a face. Sometimes it looks like a line of light. Sometimes it's just the way your hand knows the rope is there before you see it." "I like the faces," Isla admitted. "They like being liked," Nessa said. "But they will not dress up if they don't need to." Eamon watched the three colors under the boat. "What do they do when they meet?" he asked Rowan. "They talk," Rowan said. "They set down what they've been carrying. They decide which of them will take which piece farther. They decide who needs slowing. They decide who needs lifting. They calm each other. We listen, then we sleep well." Bran, who had crossed on many such evenings, leaned his head back and let the last of the light fall on his face. "Sometimes," he said, "they borrow a human story to tell their own. Sometimes they lend us theirs." Rowan let the skiff drift the last coil of the crossing, and laid the side against the low stones like a careful hand laying down a cup. He held the boat while each stepped out, then stepped out himself and tied off with a short, easy knot. "If the water rises a finger, I'll push her higher," he said, patting the gunwale. "If it falls, she'll settle." The hearing place was simple. The flat stones of the bank laid in a crescent, a few worn places where people's cloaks had polished the rock, the ring of hazel trees that held the light wind like a friendly net. Someone had set 3 lanterns on low branches, one with clear panes, one with pale mica, one with amber glass. Eamon noticed and smiled. Some innkeeper or child had the right kind of mind for such details. Others had come on foot by the path that kept to the higher ground. The baker's wife with her kettle. The elder who liked lists, without his charcoal, because this was not a list kind of evening. 2 farmers who had planned to go home but had felt the tug in the soles of their feet and turned toward the river instead. A mother with her baby, who slept with the complete trust small bodies know at the right hour. They sat with space between them, the way people do when they know they are together without needing to press close. Rowan took his usual place near the waterline. Nessa sat 2 stones up, where her knees would forgive her. Eamon found a spot where Ayla could see the seam, and Eamon could watch her see it. Bran settled 1 level behind them, the harp still wrapped. For a few breaths there was only the ordinary. The slap of a fish near reeds, the scrape of a boot moving on stone, the small cough of a man who had swallowed his tea wrong, and then right. Then the place did the thing Nessa had named. The sound that was not just water and not just wind arrived. The part that sounded like the place speaking to itself. The low, even tone that sits under all the other sounds and holds them up. Isla put her fingers on the stone beside her. The vibration reached her skin, then her bones. It was not strong, it was steady. She matched her breath to it, steady in, steady out, and the worry that had sat at the corner of her mouth all day softened the way flour softens under a hand. "Good," Eamon whispered. She glanced at him and saw that his hand rested on his chest in the same rhythm. Breath, heartbeat, touch. She knew the shape now. She had learned it by 100 small practices since the river had returned to their days. Her father had shown her without speeches, by moving slowly when he meant it, by tying knots that held without cutting, by setting his needle and thread down between breaths instead of driving them forward when his shoulders had already asked for rest. On the sandbar midstream, a circle of smooth pebbles that had not been there an hour before arranged themselves by the simple act of water laying them down. The ring was no larger than a wheel. It did not ask for attention. The otters, who clearly had some hand in it, slid into the deeper run and vanished, as if embarrassed at having been seen doing plain work. "Do you see?" Nessa asked Isla quietly. "Yes," Isla said. She knew better than to ask what it meant. It meant what it looked like, a place set for sitting, a welcome. Across the joined water, the first spirit took a shape. It was not dramatic. A line of pale light thickened along the seam where the hazel's quick water threaded through the rest, and the air above it shifted as if warmed by a soft hand. A face formed. Not a whole face, just enough. Eyes like river stones, a line for a mouth that looked kind because it had practice being closed when it had no need to speak. Hair that was more like a run of ripples than hair at all. Isla's fingers tightened on the stone, then eased. The moment carried weight the way a blanket carries it, spreading it, making it restable. She did not point. She smiled with her mouth closed, and that was enough greeting. The second shape came from the glass, clean and upright, no edge on the brightness, the calm that comes from seeing far and not needing to claim the distance. The third rose from the black, not rising much at all, more a deepening of the surface, a promise of depth made friendly by the way it remained close to the bank. The three sat across the water, not in a straight line, not in a triangle, but in a shape that made room for listening. Rowan took off his cap without fuss and put it in his lap. The baker's wife set her kettle down so it would not steam over. Bran loosened the cloth around his harp and laid his hand across the strings to keep them quiet until quiet could hold them. The spirit on the hazel's run inclined its head. One notch, a shared breath. The glass's spirit did the same. The black spirit, deeper in the water, sent a single, slow ring that reached the stone where Isla sat and made the surface there lift the width of a fingernail. Touch again. The invitation had come all the way across. "Good evening," Nessa said, in the voice one uses with elders whose names you could say but don't need to, because you feel them at the back of your tongue anyway. Isla looked at her father. "Now?" she whispered. "Now we listen," Eamon said. "That is our part first." Bran tipped the harp and let one soft string sound. A single line, no tune yet, like clearing a space for a path. The note lay down and did not call attention to itself. The spirits did not object. The note had matched the room. On the far bank, above the place where the black eased in, someone lit 2 more lamps. The warm light ran out across the water and made 3 bright bars that did not quite reach the sandbar. Children on that side were hushed by gentle hands, the way children are hushed when adults want to hear without turning the wish to silence into a rule. An old man coughed and then held a mint leaf in his cheek to keep his throat calm. The listening deepened. The Hazel's spirit lifted a hand. It was not exactly a hand, but it did what hands do when they want to begin without stating a claim. Bran's fingers left the strings. Rowan's hands settled on his knees. Eamon smoothed the edge of Ayla's sleeve because that helped his own chest keep its pace. Ayla did not move at all. Stillness is also a choice when it is chosen. The first voice came over the water, low, even, close. It sounded like a shore where small stones click against each other when waves turn them. If it had chosen words, it might have sounded like this. We came from 3 directions. We come here to be one a while. We have stories to pass between us, and we can carry them better when they are shared. The words were not heard as words, but their shape was clear. Ayla's shoulders lowered the width of a breath. The baker's wife smiled at the kettle as if it had told a joke worth keeping. Nessa put her hand on the stone and kept it there, the way people touch a friend's arm at the beginning of a long visit. "Let it come," Rowan murmured, more to the bank than to any person. The bank obliged by staying exactly as it was. The glass's spirit sent its part next, not higher, not lower, a clean thread that the rest could weave around. The sense of long sight, of winter ice cracked without injury, of the straightness of a path that does not insist on itself. Then the black spirit sent its answer, a warm bass you could feel at the throat and the wrists, the promise that whatever was heavy would not be heavy forever, if you set it down in the right place. Ayla thought of the seamstress's shop, of the day's last thread, of the way careful hands tie off and hide the knot so the cloth can be worn without catching. She thought of the small worry that had sat with her all day about a debt that would be due at week's end, and that she could not yet see how to meet without rushing and breaking the pace of work. The worry did not leave, it eased its grip. She pressed her palm to the stone and felt the ring from the black's greeting lingering there, steady as a cat purr under a table. Eamon, who had been turning over his own quieter troubles, how to say yes to a new commission without saying no to sleep, found that the question made a little more sense sitting on the bank than it had sitting at the work table. He would still have to decide. He would decide better after this. Bran, who had come for the pleasure of hearing and to lend his hands if asked, opened the cloth from the harp fully and tested a pair of notes that felt like laying a blanket over a child. He stopped there. The blanket was enough for now. On the sandbar, the ring of pebbles took on a small brightness, not from lamps, not from moon, but from the way smooth, wet surfaces will hold the last of the day a breath longer than dry ones. Everyone could see them. No one needed to point. The hazel spirit lifted its knot hand again, and a new shape showed at the edge of the current. hazel leaves turning in place on a patch of still water. They made a circle without planning to. Nessa's shoulders rose and fell once. "The leaves are ready," she whispered. "The first telling can begin." Isla turned to her father. "What will it be about?" "About water," Amon said, which was true enough and safe enough to say aloud. Rowan looked up the line of the hazel, down the line of the black, and across the glass. Everything had come as it should. The ferryman's work, which on most days was carrying people, tonight was making sure his own stillness didn't wobble the surface that wanted to stay smooth. He pressed his palm to the stone at his side. Breath, heartbeat, touch. The old anchors held. Across the joined water, the hazel spirit bent the line of light in a way that meant greeting, and the sound that followed was the beginning of a story. It did not rush. It did not claim importance. It began the way a river begins a bend, by leaning a little toward the place it means to go. The first words would come next. But for now, the bank had done its work, the listeners had settled, and the three rivers had found each other again. The evening held its breath and let it out in one long, easy sigh. The sound, like the place speaking, drew a little closer, the way a hearth sound draws closer when someone adds a small stick. The hazel spirit leaned toward the sandbar, and a run of pale light skated along the surface. Isla felt it under her fingers on the stone. She didn't name it. She let it be what it was. "They'll begin with a small story," Rowan whispered. "They usually do." The hazel spirit sent the image in a simple way, pictures on the water like a finger drawing in wet sand. A child stood by a quick brook, a handful of pebbles pressed to his chest. He dropped them all at once. They scattered. He lost the one he liked. He sat and cried, then remembered a grandmother's advice. One at a time is still enough. He chose a pebble, rolled it once in his palm, and let it go. He watched where it landed. He chose the next only after he had seen the first settle. In a few breaths, he had placed them all in a line that pleased him, and his loss felt like a lesson instead. Isla let out the breath she hadn't meant to hold. Amon tilted his head her way but said nothing. He didn't need to. She knew what he would have said. The debt due at week's end felt like a fist only when she tried to hold the whole thing at once. One at a time is still enough. Her thumb moved along the stone. Touch told her the lesson had landed. The glass's spirit took up the telling. The surface quieted and showed a field of winter ice, clear and thick. A thin trail sketched itself from bank to bank, not straight, because straight would have cracked, but sure, bending where the ice asked for mercy. A figure crossed, step by step, pausing when small clicks spoke, moving when the sound hushed. He reached the far side because he kept his breath even and let his feet listen. Amon smiled at the exactness. Not tonight. He thought about the extra commission waiting at his door. Tomorrow, maybe. I'll let the path bend. He laid 2 fingers on his chest. Breath, heartbeat, and the steady thump agreed. The black spirit sent a picture from below. Darkness, then a slow upwelling that carried leaves that had forgotten light. A hand reached in, not snatching, not scooping, only offering its palm. The leaves drifted there and slid off, and the hand was not empty, because the offering had changed it. Nessa's breath caught and softened. She had meant to bring an old memory to the bank, and hadn't decided whether to set it down. The picture answered, "Set it down, without throwing it away." Bran woke 2 strings. The notes were quiet and warm. They didn't steer the river. They helped the listening. Rowan stood to check the rope tied earlier at the low step. "We'll leave it," he said. "If fog comes, someone will be glad of it." "Fog?" Ayla asked. "Word on the path," Rowan said. "Sea fog rolling in from the west. It may kiss the banks before midnight." He glanced at the sky, still holding the last thin silver. Not a worry, a reminder to have good habits ready. The hazel's spirit bent light again, a thin branch over water, heavy with leaves. A child tugged for the pleasure of tugging and slipped. The branch swung up. The child came up too, spitting and surprised, and found a rope because an uncle on the step had kept a hand on it. The picture faded. Isla and Eamon exchanged a look. Rowan touched the line, nodded once. The spirits weren't predicting. They were teaching in the old way. Show first, trust people to remember. Across the join, the evening's first small trial arrived wearing an ordinary face. A group from the farther village reached the opposite bank. A woman with a jug, a boy with quick feet, a man with a limp. The boy ran ahead because the water was right there and the grown-ups were talking. He stepped down, 1, 2, and took a 3rd step without taking the rope. His shoe slid on the green strip every river keeps as a test. He sat down with a splash, not far, but far enough to make a body forget its calm. Before fear could learn his name, 3 things happened in the easy order practice makes. The man with the limp planted his staff behind the boy's shoulder to stop the slide. The woman set the jug down and tightened the rope with both hands. And Rowan, who had already loosened his skiff when he saw the boy run, pushed off and reached the step in 2 sure strokes. "Hold the rope," Rowan called, steady as a wall. "Sit where you are. Good. I'm putting my hand under your elbow." The boy's breath, short from cold surprise, remembered to lengthen. He felt the rope in his right hand, the smooth push of water on his calves, the strong hand under his left elbow. Touch. He rose with the rope, let the hand guide him to the higher step, and found his feet. The woman nodded, not as praise, just as confirmation that the world still worked. "Sorry," the boy said, because it was the next right thing. "Thank the rope," Rowan said, smiling, "and the habit, and your people." "I will," the boy said, and though he forgot to say it aloud, he pressed his cheek to the rope for a breath before letting go. It amounted to the same thing. Isla's body released the tightness it had collected while she watched. She hadn't noticed her hand on her father's sleeve. She let go. He covered her knuckles for 1 beat in answer. Breath, heartbeat, touch. The spirits didn't make much of the rescue. They don't clap. They offer next things. The hazel spirit showed a line of dropped stitches picked up, one by one, turned into a clean border. Ayla recognized it at once and grinned. The glasses spirit held the surface clear. The black spirit deepened and quieted, as if proud of ordinary competence. Fog came the way Rowan had promised, with manners. It softened the far lamps into halos and left pearls on hazel leaves. The river took it as it takes everything, without fuss.
"I'll hang a stern light," Rowan said. "No reason for the bank to guess where I am." "Take mine," the baker's wife said, handing him a clear-paned lantern. "Bright, not blinding." "Good," Rowan said, clipping it to the stern loop. He tested the swing. The light drew small stars across the black's edge. That spirit answered with a low ring that made the lantern shiver, just enough for Rowan to see it had heard. A shepherd reached the near path with a limp lamb across his shoulders, and worry set in his jaw. "She turned on the slope," he said. "I'm taking her to the far green. I can wrap the leg. I just need the other bank."
"We can do it," Rowan said. "You'll ride, I'll pull. We'll let the river tell us where it is." He placed the lantern, then pressed his palm to the gunwale. The wood gave back the faint thrum that meant the current was even and the wind harmless. "I'll come to quiet her," Nessa said, standing. "Old hands do well with small hearts." "Ayla," Eamon said, "hold the rope here." "I will," Ayla said. "If someone comes, I'll show them how." "You will," Eamon said, trusting that saying it would help make it true. Rowan settled the shepherd and the lamb at the skiff's center, where movement does least mischief, and put Nessa at the bow with her hand flat to the deck. He pushed off. The fog received them without hiding them. The lantern made a small tunnel. Rowan felt for bottom, then the next place, then the next. He listened. The hazels hiss over shallow stones, the glasses' quiet slide, the black's slow brown roll. He set each push to each sound, and felt the pole answer the way a good staff answers a walker's palm. They reached the far stones and landed with an easy scrape. The shepherd nodded the kind of nod men use when a thing has gone well and praise would be excessive. "I'll wrap her up there," he said, pointing to the grass. "I'll come back with a cup." Rowan touched his cap and drifted back into the tunnel of light. The fog would hold for a while yet, then thin. There was time. Bran unwrapped his harp. "May I?" he asked the river, softly. The hazel's light flickered like a yes. He set his fingers and offered a pattern of even notes, the kind of tune that makes hands remember good work. Ayla watched the fog and listened to the run. Her breath matched the pattern without effort. Two men arrived on the near path, talking too quickly and too close. They carried rolled bark with charcoal marks. "We should cut a side channel from the hazel," one said. "The mill can turn through the night." "The fields want it more," the other said. "Borrow from the glass for 2 weeks, the upper rows will live." They saw Eamon first, because he was standing. They looked past Ayla because they had not yet learned to look where quiet people sit. Rowan was mid-river. Nessa was on the far bank. Bran kept playing. The baker's wife set down her kettle with a click that meant sentences, not shouts. "What's the trouble?" Eamon asked, even voice. "The wheel," said the first. "The terraces," said the second. They tried to talk at once, then glared at each other for trying to talk at once. "Stop," Isla said. Not loud, clear. Both turned, surprised to hear a young voice between their needs. "Tell it plain. One, then the other. We'll hear." The miller rubbed his brow with his thumb, as if the words might come straighter that way. "The wheel is sound. With more water, we can grind through night. The village downriver won't wait a week." The farmer lifted his plan. "The upper terraces are failing. If we draw a ditch from the glass for 2 weeks, the seed will take. After that, we close it." Eamon read their hands, not their marks. Both wanted to be useful. Both had stopped sleeping. He breathed in for 4, held for 4, out for 4, held for 4. Breath, heartbeat, touch. "We'll let the bank help," he said. "How?" the miller asked. "By borrowing each other's habits," Eamon said, choosing one small tool at a time. He pointed at the rope. "You wait and count 20 while he speaks. You wait and count 20 while he speaks. Then we count together to 20 and choose a trial." "This is foolish," the miller muttered, but folded his arms and counted anyway, because something in him liked being told what to do when his head was tired. They spoke in turns. The wheel wouldn't waste the flow. The ditch wouldn't steal it forever. While they talked, the spirits sent small signs. The hazel let 3 leaves slip into the shallows, and the current braided them, then let them go. The glass laid a line of light steady across the farmer's bark. The black sent a slow ring that touched the miller's boot. Neither man saw the signs. They felt them. The soft pulse at the wrist, the warmth at the back of the knee easing. "Trial," Isla said, when they had emptied the words they'd been repeating to themselves all day. 3 nights to the mill while the moon is thin. 3 days to the fields while the sun is fat. Then meet again. "Who decides after?" the farmer asked. "We do," Eamon said, lifting a hand when the farmer's mouth gathered a protest that hadn't formed yet. "We, not I, not he. We." They stood, breathing. Bran's tune stitched under their breathing. Rowan's lantern moved through fog and came back with the soft bump of a boat kissing stone. Across, the shepherd waved. The lamb stood with a rag bandage and a surprised face at being fine. "All right," the miller said, because the right words had been spoken in the right order. 3 and 3. "All right," the farmer said, rubbing his eyes. "We'll see." They shook the way neighbors shake, firm, not hard. Ayla felt a warmth that was not pride and not relief, a knot loosened with patience instead of yanked until it broke. Rowan tied off and stepped to the stones. "What did I miss?" "2 people doing the hard part," the baker's wife said, pouring tea, choosing to stay neighbors. "Best news," Rowan said, accepting the cup. Heat moved into his fingers. The fog thinned to lace, then to nothing. Rowan pinched the lantern's flame and left the hook empty. Across the water, the ring of pebbles on the sandbar brightened. Not a flame, more like wet stone remembering daylight. The spirits turned their faces. Hazel's quick smile. Glasses a loud calm. Black's steady depth. And the ring seemed to invite something. "They'll ask for tokens," Nessa said as she returned, easing onto the stone. "They do when a night holds both trouble and answer."
What kind?
Isla asked. "Something to stand for what you want to carry better," Nessa said. She untied a small cloth from her wrist. Inside lay a single gray hair, curled and soft, knotted on itself. "I've been holding my husband's last day like a stone. I'll carry it as a song." Bran drew a broken harp string from his pocket. "The one that snapped when I tried to be clever," he said, smiling at himself. "I'll set it down as a lesson I can keep without it biting." Eamon opened his pouch. He took out a sliver of beeswax and a short piece of thread. "For rest," he said, wrapping them together. And finishing. The baker's wife shook a twist of paper. Sugar grains shone on it. "For sweetness where I scold," she said, rolling her eyes at herself. Rowan pressed a hand into the inside pocket of his vest and brought out a small river pebble, flat and warm from his body. "For the habit that keeps my feet where they should be when fog comes," he said. "I'll keep the habit. I'll give the worry." Isla looked into her basket. Under a mended sleeve and a wrapped coin lay a bright scrap she'd once saved from a dress hem, pretty and unused. She thought of the debt and the handful she'd tried to hold all at once. She tore the scrap in three, not for drama, but because 3 small pieces would be easier to give than 1 large piece. "For one at a time," she said. "How do we offer them?" Bran asked. "The sandbar," Nessa said. "Rowan will ferry in pairs. 2 at a time keeps the boat honest." "I'll take Isla and Eamon first," Rowan said, weighing steadiness the way he always did. "Then Nessa and Bran, then whoever else wishes." They went in that order. Isla and Eamon stepped in, set their feet wide, held the gunwale light. Rowan pushed off. Midstream, the 3 spirits turned their attention so the skin of the water over the sandbar went still enough to accept a letting go. Cold brushed Isla's ankles through the hull, the kind that wakes without warning. Touch. She set her 3 scraps on the ring, one by one, with the care she gave a hem that must lie flat. She didn't wish. She placed. Wishing felt too much like pressing. Placing felt like trust. Eamon laid the beeswax and thread bundle beside hers and, because habit is strong, pressed it lightly as if to set a knot. The pebbles held it. He breathed once and felt a small space open behind his eyes where sleep might fit later. Rowan ferried Nessa and Bran. Nessa's curled hair looked right there, like a morning curl left on a pillow. Bran coiled the broken string on itself. It made a small circle, pleased to be a circle. The baker's wife went last, set her twist of sugar where a ring of dark water would keep it from damp as long as such things can be kept. Rowan turned the pebble in his hand and put it back in his pocket. "You changed your mind?" Isla asked when he returned. "Not quite," Rowan said. "I'll keep it one more night. Some things want a different morning." The spirits offered no approval and no correction. They like people who know their own pockets. The ring held the tokens. The current passed around the small altar as if it had always been there. Many nights like this, it had. The middle hours came. The kind that don't feel like hours, because the air is kind and the body knows its job. Bran played lines between talk and quiet. The list-loving elder dozed and woke and dozed again without snoring, which was a gift. Isla leaned her head on Eamon's shoulder. He did not move, because not moving is sometimes a father's finest art. As often happens, a last small lesson came. A girl from the far bank arrived with a wooden bowl. Her mother had sent her for water to wash fruit. She had seen the tokens, had seen the spirits, understood enough to be respectful, not enough to be afraid. "May I take from the edge?" she asked, speaking to all, because the question belonged to all. "You may," Nessa said. "Let the bowl learn the river's weight before you fill it." The girl knelt and dipped the bowl halfway. The water pressed, the bowl pressed back. She held her breath, then let it out, and the press balanced itself. She filled the bowl and lifted it with her arms close to her body, the way old women carry when they mean to be kind to their shoulders. She bowed slightly toward the sandbar without staring and walked away. Nothing had happened. Something had happened. A person learned the feel of the river. Nights like these are made of such things. Rowan watched the inn lantern appear and vanish as thin fog wove and unwove. He felt the pull in his chest that meant the big moment was close. The joining the old people called the threefold song, when Hazel, Glass, and Black would lean fully into one another and speak as one. It wasn't a time for heroics. It was a time for bodies to be still and ready so the sound could land and rest for later dreams. Ayla straightened and smoothed her skirt, then set her hand on the stone again. Eamon adjusted his seat to keep his back kind. Nessa wrapped her shawl tighter. Bran checked one string and left the rest alone. The baker's wife blew out one lantern and left two. Rowan laid his pole aside and simply sat, palms down on the stone, eyes on the place where three colors had become one. The ring of pebbles brightened a little, like a face about to speak. The three spirits turned, not to the people, but to one another. The bank heard the first edge of the shared tone, low, even, wider than one river could hold alone. Ayla felt it in the skin of her wrists. Eamon felt it in his teeth. Rowan felt it in her palms. Breath, heartbeat, touch. They were ready. The night stepped forward and stood, unafraid. They would go the rest of the way together. The ring of pebbles on the sandbar brightened, not like fire, more like wet stone remembering daylight. The three spirits, Hazel, quick and bright, Glass, clear and calm, Black, deep and steady, turned toward one another until their edges touched. The sound rose, low, round, even, and the bank felt it as touch before it heard it as tone. Palms on stone picked it up first, then wrists, then ribs, breath, heartbeat, touch. Rowan set both hands flat and let the thrum come up into them. "Let it carry you," he said quietly. "Don't try to carry it." Isla pressed her fingers to the stone. The vibration reached her skin and made a path up her arms. It wasn't a shock, it was a steadiness. Her breath matched it. The small knot at the corner of her mouth smoothed and stayed smooth. Iman placed his hand over his heart and felt his chest choose the river's pace without effort. Bran laid his palm across the harp's frame and felt the wood agree. Nessa rested both hands on her walking stick and let the stick pass the sound into her palms, the way old friends pass good news with a squeeze. The threefold song came across the water in plain ways. It did not choose big words. It chose small instructions that feel true when you test them. The hazel's quick voice said, "We begin with what is in reach." The glass's even voice said, "We keep our line by bending when the path asks." The black's warm voice said, "We carry what we are given and set some down where it can dissolve." The ring of pebbles began to turn, a slow circle that did not disturb the water more than a fingertip does when it draws a shape. On the ring, the tokens people had placed gave small answers of their own. Nessa's soft curl loosened from its knot and lay in the light as if it had found a better resting place. Bran's coiled string darkened, then glinted, and held its new circle without biting. Amon's beeswax and thread warmed in the wet and did not fall apart. Isla's 3 scraps held where she had put them, spaced with care, like 3 tasks that didn't need to fight. The spirit spoke again, not to the ear, but to the skin and the small bones. The joined voice said, "Now we pass this through you." The water rose a finger at the bank. It touched ankles, the way a friend taps your arm to be sure you are listening. It was cool and present. Bodies answered with small, honest reactions, a shiver followed by a smile, a deeper breath without being told, shoulders dropping as if someone had taken a weight away. On the far side, the shepherd with the lamb lifted a hand. The lamb blinked at the touch on its leg and didn't complain. The miller and the farmer stood shoulder to shoulder because the space between them had been set right for sharing. The baker's wife put her hand on the kettle and then on her chest, accepting the heat in one place and the cool in the other as a true balance. "Now," Nessa said softly, as if nudging the hour from one side of the line to the other, "we answer." "How?" Isla asked, not wanting to miss the right way. "By choosing," Nessa said, "by saying what we will carry and how." Rowan stood, not to speak for anyone, only to give the moment a body to look at. "We'll speak once around," he said, "plain words. Then we'll touch the rope together." The rope lay along the lower step where he had tied it earlier, its line a habit made visible. People shifted to make the circle easy. The threefold song kept on, low, steady, wide, so every voice had a floor to stand on. Iman nodded to Isla. "You first," he said. "One thing." Isla looked at the 3 scraps on the ring. "I owe by week's end," she said, not ashamed. "I will fill it in 3 parts. I will take 3 small jobs, not 1 large rush. I will ask for fair payment in coin or in credit for thread. I will sleep each night." She said it like measuring cloth. 1, 2, 3. No drama, just the truth laid flat. "I have 2 aprons torn.
the baker's wife said at once. "I'll pay with coin and bread." "I have a cart cover that needs mending," Rowan added. "Pay is coin. The deadline is kind." "My harp wrap needs a new seam," Bran said, smiling at himself. "Payment is a tune at your choosing." "And I will speak to the lender," Nessa said, tapping her stick. "He respects old women who say what they mean. His rate will be fair when told to be fair." The threefold song moved across ankles and calves like a yes. Eamon cleared his throat. "I will take the new commission," he said, "but I will set hours. I will stop when my breath shortens. I will finish what I start each day and leave a small thread to show me where to begin the next. I will not work through night unless the village burns." "The village will not burn," Rowan said, cheerful as fact. "The river is here."
The miller lifted a hand. 3 nights, then 3 days, he said to the farmer, repeating their trial so the bank could hear. "I'll bring my men to help close the ditch when your seed has taken. I'll bring my boys to turn the wheel when your grain is heavy," the farmer said. "We will meet here after 6, and we will say what is next, and we will not pretend to have done it alone." Across the water, the threefold song gave a low pulse that reached the soles of their feet. It felt like stepping onto a floor that would not give way. Nessa touched the curl at the sandbar with 2 fingers and let her hand rest in the current. "I will sing his last day to myself in the morning and not at night," she said, meaning her husband. "I will let the dark hold sleep instead of grief. I will turn the grief to a small kindness for someone who has not asked. That is how he would do it." Bran set his palm on the harp's frame. "I will play simpler," he said, "not for applause. When the river sets a tempo, I will follow. When it asks for quiet, I will keep my hand on the strings and let the quiet be the song." Rowan looked at the pebble in his vest pocket and felt the threefold song in his hands. "I will return this," he said. "I kept it to teach my feet a habit. The habit is learned. The worry can go. The pebble can keep teaching by doing its old work." He stepped down to the lowest stone, where the water had come to meet his boots, and set the pebble on the step where the current washed it and let it go and brought it back, a child's game played without strain. He kept his palms on the stone as he did it. Breath, heartbeat, touch. The cool against his fingers felt like a promise kept. In the circle, others made small choices. The elder with the lists said, "I will leave the charcoal at home 1 day each week." A mother said, "I will sit while the water boils." A boy said, "I will hold the rope without being told." He blushed, and the rope hummed as if offering to be held at once so the boy could begin. The threefold song lifted, not louder, wider. The spirits leaned fully into one another until there was no seam at all. Across the joined surface, a line of small rings ran out and came back, like breath moving through a sleeping house. Isla felt them at her ankles and shins. She did not move. The water's cool pressed around her skin in a way that made the inside of her arms warm. She rubbed her thumb and forefinger together once and found they were steady. "Touch the rope," Rowan said. They did. Each hand found a place. Skin met braided fiber. The rope was rough in the good way, something you can trust without looking. A warm pressure moved through the line, not as a trick, not as magic pretending to be a trick, only as proof that many hands had made one thing. The threefold song came into the rope, and the rope passed it into palms, and the line of bodies felt like a bridge anyone could walk across without fear. Isla's hand found the farmer's on one side and the baker's wife's on the other. She did not think of debt in that moment. She thought of threads joined to make a seam that would not pull apart in washing. Eamon's hand found Bran's. Bran squeezed once and let go, recognizing a craftsman's hand by feel. The small, hard pads, the strength without show. Rowan's hand found Nessa's. She squeezed for the length of one breath and eased, as if to say, "You have done your work. Keep doing it." The threefold song reached its full shape. It did not climb to a shout or an anthem. It settled into a wide note that would live in bodies until morning. The ring of pebbles turned once, then stilled. On the sandbar, the tokens changed in small ways that made sense. The sugar twist dampened at one end and held at the dry end, a reminder to sweeten on purpose. The beeswax took a thumbprint and kept it, a reminder that hands shape rest. The harp string shone. The curl lay like a small river on stone. The three scraps stayed where they had been placed, a reminder that not everything needs to be carried away to be made lighter. A wind moved down the valley and raised gooseflesh on forearms. It was not cold, it was a marker, like turning a page. The spirits eased apart, not into distance, into their own holding places. Hazel quick and bright at the shallow edge, glass clean and calm in the run, black deep and steady at the slow bend. The joined current kept its new shore line. Rowan drew a breath and let it out as if laying down a pole. "We'll close the night," he said, "not because it is over, because it is kept." "Tea," the baker's wife said, raising the kettle. "Bread," Eamon added, opening a cloth. "2 notes," Bran offered, lifting the harp. Nessa gave a nod that ended a chapter and began the next. "Bring the bowl," she told Isla. "We'll warm our hands." They passed cups. The steam rose and smelled of black tea and the faint edge of river mineral on clean clay. Isla wrapped her fingers around the bowl and felt the heat ease the cool that had held her skin. She took a careful sip. Taste opened across her tongue. Simple, right, with the small sweetness the baker's wife always adds when she knows the village needs it. "Good," Isla said, and meant more than tea. "Good," Eamon echoed. He tore bread, dipped it in a dish of salt, and pressed it into Isla's hand. The bread tasted like flour and fire and the clean air of evening. The salt lit the taste without scolding it. He chewed, and the warmth reached his chest. His shoulders let go another measure. Across the water, the innkeeper set a pan outside to cool. It smelled of stew, meat, onion, carrot, and the smell drifted to the bank. Someone opened a jar of pickled beet. Someone else peeled an apple. and the bright, wet scent ran like a fresh line through the darker flavors. Children dozed where they sat, heads against shoulders they trusted. A baby sighed, then sank into sleep with a whisper of breath. Lamps made small, steady circles. Rowan untied the rope at one end and coiled it without hurry. "Leave it?" the farmer asked, already knowing the answer. "We leave the other end," Rowan said. "Fog or no fog, the habit stays." The miller lifted the coil and set it where the rope would rest clean, out of mud. "3 nights," he said again, as if binding the plan with the right knot. "3 days," the farmer answered, meeting the knot with his own. Bran's 2 notes became 4, and then returned to 2. He stopped there. Silence wore them well. Nessa hummed under her breath, a line that had once been a grief and was now simply a song that knew where to go. She looked at the ring on the sandbar and nodded to herself. "That's right," she said. "You can stay." Isla and Iman watched the scraps in their careful places. "Tomorrow I'll take the aprons," Isla said. "Morning after, the cart cover," Rowan said. "And the harp wrap next," Bran added. "Then the last piece will meet itself." "And sleep," Iman reminded. "And sleep," she agreed. They rose together. Not because the hour ordered them to, because the bodies had finished what they needed to receive. People moved with the small care of those who have been given something and mean to carry it home without spilling. Rowan steadied the skiff with a foot. One by one, pairs and threes crossed back, each landing a simple touch, each push-off a small farewell that promised return. Hands met gunwale, feet found plank, breath matched the soft push of the pole. Isla and Eamon waited for the last crossing so they could help douse the lamps. Isla took the clear-paned one. Eamon took the amber. Rowan took the pale. They breathed, blew, and watched the tiny flames bow and go. The smell of smoke curled up, clean and thin, and then was gone. Night kept enough light for safe footing. The sky took the rest. On the far path, the miller and farmer walked side by side without needing to fill the quiet. The shepherd carried the lamb, who had accepted the bandage and the story. The baker's wife tied her kettle to her belt with a well-practiced loop. Bran wrapped his harp with hands that did not try to teach the cloth a better way to be cloth. Nessa set her stick and lifted her chin to meet the air like a person who knows the door by touch. Rowan tied the skiff at both ends, patted the gunwale, and stood for a breath with his palms against the wood. "Thank you," he said to the boat, to the river, to the night. He did not say it loudly. He did not need to. Ayla paused at the top of the bank and looked back. The ring on the sandbar still held a soft brightness. The 3 scraps looked small and sure. The river ran in its new long line, carrying everything that had been given without making a show of it. She lifted her hand, then set it down. Some goodbyes are better kept inside the chest where breath can hold them. "Come on," Eamon said gently. "Let's go home. I'll steep time for sleep." "I'll mend after morning," Ayla said. testing the sentence in her mouth and liking how it felt. They walked through the quiet lane. A cat cut across their path and didn't hurry. From an open window came the low talk of a family finishing a small argument with a joke. The air smelled of damp earth, smoke from dung cakes cooling, and the faint sweetness of apple peel on a sill. At their door, Eamon put his palm to the wood and felt the small thrum that houses learn from people coming and going. It matched his chest. He smiled and opened. Inside, the room held the day's heat and let it go in a measured way. Eamon lit one lamp, turned the wick low, and put the kettle on. Isla washed her hands at the basin, drying them on a cloth she had finished that afternoon. She could feel the seam under her fingers. It was strong and even. She placed her 3 scraps on the shelf above the table, not as trophies, as reminders. She tapped each one once, one at a time. Eamon poured hot water over the thyme and waited until the smell rose, a clean, green steam that said bed without needing to. He added a curl of lemon peel and a little honey. For softness, he said. They sat. The cups were warm in their hands. The taste was simple and good, herb and citrus and the gentle sweetness that lets the throat relax. Ayla's shoulders dropped another inch. Eamon's eyes shifted toward sleep and didn't fight it. "What was your favorite part?" Isla asked, voice already quieter. "The rope," Eamon said, how it felt when many hands made one line. He pressed his palm to the table and smiled at the memory in the skin. "You?" he asked. "The touch at my ankles," she said. "How I didn't pull away. How I didn't need to." She rubbed the outside of her wrist and found the steady that the river had left there like a friend's hand. They cleaned up without hurry. Eamon set the cups to dry. Isla folded the cloth in 4 and placed it by the basin. They blew out the lamp. The dark was kind. Isla lay down and felt the day's work settle in the way a blanket settles when you lay it right. Eamon stretched his back and felt the tight place let go because he had asked it to, not because he had bullied it. "Good night, little river," Isla whispered toward the window. "Good night, long river," Eamon answered, meaning the same thing in a bigger way. Across the village, the miller slept with the plan in his pocket like a folded note. The farmer slept with the same plan under his pillow, not because it needed hiding, because he wanted to wake to it. The shepherd slept on his side with the lamb against his knees. The baker's wife slept with flour still in the lines of her hands, and the lines looked like small white rivers on soft ground. Rowan slept with empty pockets and did not miss the pebble. Nessa slept on her back, mouth slightly open, one hand over her chest, the hum of a remembered tune holding the place where grief had rested for a long time. Down at the confluence, the threefold song eased into the deeper run. The ring of pebbles dimmed to ordinary, which is to say it kept doing its important job without asking for marks of importance. The tokens shifted as the current asked. In the morning, there would be small signs, a thread caught on a stone, a faint sweetness on a pebble, a curl of hair nestled in a crease, but nothing anyone needed to gather. The river had taken what was offered and made it part of what it already knew how to carry. When dawn came, it came on soft feet. The first light lifted the neat seam of water where the hazel, the glass, and the black met without fuss. Mist rose where the sun touched the cool. Birds started with small sounds and then sang a little more when the air agreed. Rowan walked to the bank with a heel of bread and half an apple and ate them leaning on the piling. He tossed the last bite of apple into the shallows. An otter came and took it with a dignity that made Rowan laugh under his breath. Isla woke before the market bell, tied her hair, and set out with the aprons and a needle roll. She met the baker's wife at the door of the bakehouse and took the aprons home and stitched them in the window light while the village woke. She finished one, breathed, and stood. She made tea. She ate a piece of bread with honey. She returned to the second apron and finished that one too. She set the coin in a small bowl and did not count it yet. She went to the lane to meet Rowan at the cart. They measured the tear together, chose a stitch, and set a day. Bran brought the harp wrap in the afternoon and listened while Isla told him about running the seam inside so it wouldn't catch against the strings. He nodded and said, "You are the river here. I am the boat," and paid with a tune that made the window light look brighter. Eamon met the new client after midday and said, "I will do it in 5 days, not 3. It will hold better for being done as 5. The client, who had expected to push and be resisted, found himself saying, "All right," because the sentence had made sense at the first hearing. Eamon worked the first day and stopped when the thread he had laid out was done. He did not hide his tools as if ashamed of stopping. He laid them down in a neat line so his hands would know where to begin tomorrow. By week's end, the bowl on the shelf held 3 small stacks. Isla paid what she owed with a straight back and a thanks that didn't ask for favor. Nessa stood by, not to intimidate, only to be that kind of company that makes the wrong choice hard to make. The lender accepted the coins, counted them without crawling over them, and said, "Next time, if there is one, bring me early news." "We will," Isla said, and meant it. At the mill, grain turned to flour on the thin moon nights, and the wheel slowed on the fat sun days to let water go to the terraces. The ditch was opened and closed on time. The fields took the drink and showed it in their leaves. After 6 days, the farmer and the miller met at the bank and said in the same breath, "Again when needed," and shook on it, as if shaking were the easiest thing 2 hands could do. The lamb's leg mended in a week. The shepherd brought Rowan a loaf and said, "For being in the right place at the right time." Rowan answered, "For keeping the habit that makes that easy." Nessa began to sing her husband's last day in the morning while sweeping, a quiet tune that moved the dust and did not trouble sleep. Sometimes she sang it while stirring a pot. Sometimes she sang it while calling a child in from the lane. It became a song that made other people's shoulders lower. That pleased her. Bran's music changed in ways only some could hear. He left more room between notes. He ended tunes a breath earlier than applause expected, so that the last note could finish itself in the air. He played at the inn and at the bank, and once, for himself alone, at the bend where the black holds night long past dawn. The river liked that one. He could tell. The rope stayed tied on the lower step. Children learned to take it without being told. Visitors noticed and copied. It became a habit that did not need a speech to defend it. Nights at the Confluence continued. Not every evening was a night of tokens and trials. Most were listening nights, or laughing nights, or nights when people sat and said nothing together, until saying nothing together felt like a statement. The threefold song did not come to an end. It came through the place whenever three became one, and people let themselves be carried a little. Word went out along paths. At the meeting of the waters, you can hear what you already know, said in a way that helps you keep it. People from farther villages came and sat and went home and slept. Some remembered the stories, some forgot every detail and still woke rested, which is the point more often than not. As seasons turned, the meeting place kept its shape. In summer, the hazel brightened and danced. The glass thinned and spoke softly. The black cooled feet at noon. In autumn, leaves made slow circles and did not hurry to leave the surface. In winter, the seam showed itself longer, and the people made their own seam on the bank. Closer seats, closer shoulders, so heat would stay. In spring, everything loosened, and boys showed off until three aunties said their names in a certain tone, and they stopped with good humor. On a late season evening, Isla sat with her father on their step and watched children draw lines in dust. "Did you notice," she said, "how the small jobs make the bigger ones?" "Yes," Iman said, "like streams." "And how we don't have to do them alone?" she added. "Yes," he said again, "like streams." She laughed, content with the simple echo. She tasted the end of her tea, warm and a little sweet, and breathed in the smell of cooling earth and distant bread. The sound of the river, even this far, traced a steady line through the hour. Down at the bank, Rowan checked the rope and touched the piling the way he always did. The thrum answered his palms. He felt the habit settle like a good coat. He took a bite of an apple and let the bright taste cut the day's heaviness into easy pieces. He stood a while longer, like a man who knows he is exactly where his boots should be. The threefold song, hazels quick, glasses clear, blacks deep, kept moving to the sea with everything it had been given and everything it had decided to keep. It did not hurry. It did not slow for show. It moved the way rivers move when they are sure of their path and sure of their company. And when people near the confluence lay down at night, they lay down with hands that remembered rope and stone, with wrists that remembered the light push of water, with chests that remembered the slow count of breath. Smell of clean clay and river air, taste of warm milk, honey, and a small pinch of salt on bread. Pillows that knelt to the shape of a head and then held it. Windows open a hand's width for the soft night. Floors that kept the slow beat of the house. They slept. The three rivers met and spoke in the way rivers do, by running together, by sharing what they had carried, by teaching patience without scolding, by going on. Their tone reached the rooms and lanes, the inn and the steps, the cart shed and the mill. It reached the place where a pebble once learned to be round. It reached the places where a goddess came down without harm. It reached the place where three became one, and found that being one did not empty them, it filled them. We close our eyes with them now. Breath settles. Heart finds the steady drum. A palm meets cool linen. The room smells of sleep and the last of the tea. Outside, the joined waters keep their watch and make their wide, quiet sound, the sound that belongs to everyone and asks nothing in return. And as the river keeps carrying, we let the night carry us. We let it carry us. We let it carry us. As the last ripples fade and the night settles around us, thank you for drifting along these quiet waters, pebble to sea, heaven to earth, and the meeting of three old rivers. If your breath has found an easy rhythm, keep it. In and out. Feel your heartbeat steady. Feel the blankets touch your skin. And let the stories keep flowing without you. If you're a fellow night owl, let me know what time the rivers reached you tonight. There's a small magic in seeing all the hours we share across the map. And if these tales brought you a little calm, a gentle like helps other sleepy travelers find their way here. Subscribe if you'd like more mythic journeys at bedtime. I'll keep a lantern on the bank for you. Before we close, soften the room. Lower the lights one notch. Let a fan whisper or the rain app hush in the background. Find that comfortable place where your shoulders can finally drop. Imagine the water carrying every worry downstream, not lost, just lighter, while the shore holds your rest. When you wake, may you carry the patience of the pebble, the blessing of Ganga's touch, and the harmony of rivers joining. For now, there's nothing to do. No boat to catch, no line to hold. Only the quiet current of sleep. Good night, dreamer. I'll meet you again where stories move like gentle rain, just beyond the next bend.